Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Let me go around the round table, and I can now officially say Dr. Nicholas Pitts.
It happened. I can't believe they quite literally let it happen. The guy that almost failed kindergarten, did fail my driver's test, now has earned a PhD degree. So unbelievable.
And I've seen pictures of you with Adam Wright, who's been in the studio with us, and Dr. Who is it?
Jim Denison was there.
Oh, that's right. Jim Denison was standing next to you. I was trying to think who else was sitting next to you, of course.
Yeah.
And then, of course, saw pictures of your family that had to head back to Tennessee. We'll talk about why that is in just a minute. And so here we are, Dr. Nicholas Pitts.
I never would have imagined. I know Miss Hall, my kindergarten teacher, never could have fathomed it either. She had her hands full with me. So, but then again, what teacher hasn't with my little spunky personality? So, nevertheless.
Sitting there with Jim Denison, forgot that he was standing next to you, and that is you are with the Denison Forum, Director of Cultural Engagement. And Chelsey, you're sitting next to a person with a PhD. Is that pretty amazing?
PhD, yes. Try not to be intimidated, Obi.
No. She's got a law degree from SMU as the Chief of Staff at First Liberty.
I was about to say, there's no intimidation.
We get intimidated by her.
Yeah, exactly.
And also a mommy. And so that has been kind of fun to look at some of the stories and pictures of your young son. So this is a lot of fun.
Keeps me on my toes.
Yes. Well, and we'll have some birthday celebrations later and also a congratulatory time. But let's get into the issues in the news. I was hoping by Friday we might not be talking about James Comey, but I think I knew that was not going to be the case. And so let's kind of get into, first of all, just the announcement that took place and the timing. Nick, we've talked about this before with you on Wednesday, but here you are back on Friday. And again, that's been the big issue. Why did he do it then, and what was actually the backstory on this?
So you mean the issue isn't Donald Trump likes 2 scoops of ice cream?
Oh, yes.
No. So,
or Sean Spicer was near the bushes, not in the bushes.
Yeah, exactly.
Has this gotten just incredibly insane?
I saw a statistic coming over here, not that I was texting and driving, but just simply reading in traffic while I should have been driving. But nevertheless, the news media coverage of the Comey situation just yesterday was 68% of it was just dedicated to the Comey situation, which again is just showing there's just this significant interest in what's happening right now. And it really is. I am no law expert, but I've watched quite a few Law and Order episodes, but I do know that there is in the American system, you're innocent until proven guilty. And right now there's a lot of investigation that's happening surrounding the collusion with Russian officials. But again, we're innocent. So there's an innocence there, but there's so much about what the Trump campaign and the Trump administration is guilty of, is they're guilty of just a communications blunder. Mm-hmm. There's just been an incoherent message that's contradicting one another. Sean Spicer, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and then you've got Vice President Pence, and then you've got Donald Trump contradicting himself from Tuesday and Thursday. And so there's just this desire among all of us just to get the record straight.
Yes.
And so it's just increasingly frustrating, especially if you're just not immersed in it.
So, and Chelsey, I might just mention, you're chief of staff, and you try to have good, honest, and clear communication from First Liberty on a case. And if you had every one of your lawyers saying something different, for a while people would begin to wonder what's going on there at First Liberty.
Absolutely. The right hand has to know what the left hand is doing. There's lots of moving pieces. Even at First Liberty, in an institution with about 35 employees, you have marketing and media and donor relations, not to mention the legal team. And so I can't imagine how many moving pieces with this administration and these decisions going on that they're trying to keep a hold of. But look, everyone loves a scandal, and I think that we're seeing the media try to conjure up as much scandal and get as much headway out of this story as they possibly can. The same outlets that would have called for his termination last year, when right before the election, he said that he would be reopening an investigation against Clinton. They called foul play, and at that time we're demanding his departure. So it's a little bit ironic. We can definitely see that they like to play any side that is opposed to Trump at this point.
Yeah, I mean, this goes all the way back to what Neil Postman would say, and amused ourselves to death. Mm-hmm. It's the sense that there's this movement that there's no longer a delineation between entertainment and between information. Right. And so now information has to be entertaining in order for us to be able to absorb it. And so what we've seen in the news media now is it's almost just like this reality TV that they're just processing aloud for us. And in the midst of processing, the beautiful part of processing is it allows you to be able to distill that which is true from that which is false. But processing is good insofar as it's private and it's internal. But unfortunately, what we have is a 24-hour media news cycle that just has to process aloud before us. And sometimes, or more often than not, we're hearing what's false and what's not true and what's not verified. And then now we're just trying to figure out, okay, well, you said this was true 2 days ago, but now it's not true today. Like, how is this? So it's just a convoluted mess right now.
And I do think part of that has to do with the press. I mean, I'm thinking back, you, of course, have written your doctorate on John F. Kennedy. I used to, as a kid, since I'm much older than the two of you, remember watching when he would go to the State Department, because that was the big room for him to do some of these press conferences. And he would say things, and if there was a disagreement or there was a question, there would be a 24-hour lag, because then the newspapers would come out, and then by that time they had clarified it. But when you say, well, no, Donald Trump wasn't planning on firing James Comey until he received this report from Rod Rosenstein, and then he goes on and says, no, I had already made up my mind. Of course they're going to be getting on to that, because that's the kind of thing that in the past you had almost 24 hours to correct, and then very easily correct it with, again, a press at the time that were in the midst of this idea that we have the best person ever in the presidency, so they went along with what was going on.
Exactly, and we talked about this on Wednesday. Judy Woodruff, that piece in the New York Times over the weekend, she says that we've shifted, and I think she's correct here, we've shifted from a news cycle to a news cyclone right now.
Yes.
And it really is. There's just so much information out there. And so, yes, like, of course, okay, so Vice President Pence continues to say that based upon the recommendation of the Assistant Attorney General, is it Attorney General?
Deputy Attorney General.
Deputy
Rod
Attorney General.
Yeah.
Continued to say that 7 times within that presser. But then when President Trump goes on Lester Holt, he says that he had already made up his decision. And so now we're like, okay, there's just so much. Who do we believe in right now? But again, this is what the American people wanted. They wanted an individual that was anti-establishment, that was going to be somebody from the outside. And what we've seen is what we've always known to be true in any profession, that there's a positive benefit for someone that comes and has experience in that particular field. And politics is no different, especially when there's just such this vast bureaucracy that we've built over the years.
I don't know if I have any tennis players here. Maybe I'll find out during the break. But, they talk about in tennis unforced errors. That's one of those. Even today, the other day, when Donald Trump said, I came up with a new term, prime the pump. No, actually not. Some of these you just can't make up.
You literally cannot make some of this stuff up right now. And so you just, again, here's where it is. Like, we're just in a very noisy world right now. And it's just trying to...
It's not news, it's noise.
Yeah, and just trying to distill that which is significant and that which is not significant.
I think that is my biggest takeaway from all of the media is I'm not sure that I care who made the decision and at what time. What I care about is the documenting all of the reasons why. Those are the facts. Those are what need to be, significant.
Yep.
Well, let's come back and try to give some actual news and maybe a little bit of entertainment. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Dennis Prager has been making the case that the chasm between the left and the rest of the country is so unbridgeable that it should be described as a second civil war. He usually adds that unlike the first Civil War, this war is not violent. Now he's even removing that disclaimer. He now believes violence is coming. In one sense, you could say that violence is already here. He reminds us that left-wing thugs engage in violence and threats of violence with utter impunity. They shut down speakers at colleges, block highways, bridges, and airport terminals, take over college buildings and offices, occupy state capitals, and terrorize individuals in their homes. He also explains that it's beginning to dawn on many Americans that mayors, police chiefs, and college presidents have no interest in stopping this violence. Left-wing officials sympathize with the lawbreakers, and the police, who rarely sympathize with thugs of any ideology, are ordered to do nothing by emasculated police chiefs. Now you might think that a few of these leaders would change their minds and realize they must do something to protect citizens in society and students on campus. That is unlikely because they have made their peace with left-wing violence. What they fear is left-wing media. Just imagine the media backlash that would rain down upon their heads if, in protecting citizens and students, anyone in a liberal activist group was injured. They would be pilloried by the press. This leads to an important question. If these mayors, police chiefs, and college presidents will do little to stop the violence, who will? Left-wing mobs will only be allowed to own the streets for so long before other Americans decide to take matters into their own hands. We can hope that that does not happen and plead for restraint, but I think Dennis Prager is right. The second Civil War could become violent. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition here on Point of View. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Fire any James Comey for a little bit longer, and then we'll move on to some other issues. We've posted quite a few articles, so I think you'll find these helpful. We'll get into some of the religious liberty issues because we have Chelsey with us and Dr. Nicholas, I guess I should say, in studio with us. Let me give a little of the facts. Some people know this, but again, in all of the noise, sometimes you miss the news. And that is, this is a memorandum that was actually issued by Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. Now you might say, okay, who is he? Well, he's actually been in Maryland and then was actually confirmed 2 weeks ago by Congress, 94-6, by the United States Senate. 30-year career professional. And so it was very clear that as you look at some of the questions that he raised in the memo, which is entitled Restoring Public Confidence in the Federal Bureau of Investigation, that he pointed to a number of things that happened quite a while ago, obviously in July in particular. And so, and then again in October, we can talk more about that in just a minute. So the argument which was originally made is that obviously Donald Trump hadn't always been thrilled with some of the things James Comey did, but once you get this 3-page memo that goes into all those details, once you recognize that it probably is never a good time to fire the FBI director, might as well go ahead and do that. Now, the argument coming from the other side, Nick, I want you to respond to this a little bit, is, well, this will end the investigation. No, it won't, because actually now the person taking over for the FBI director is Andrew McCabe, who, by the way, is a Democrat. You might remember his wife, Jill, was the one that ran for the Virginia Senate, was helped by one of the individuals, McAuliffe, that has been friends with the Clintons. So the investigations in the House, investigations in the Senate, the FBI investigations continue on. If anything, this might have extended all of that. And that was at least the justification for why now. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, so again, you had that conversation. Why now? Like, you could have done it. You had the political equity we were talking about earlier. You just have a certain amount of political goodwill, especially that honeymoon period in January when there's so much excitement that's building around your campaign, or that turns the campaign into the administration.
Sure.
And so why not? Because again, we look back to it, and Brett Stevens from the then Wall Street Journal and then the New York Times, you got John Podhoretz, who's at Commentary Magazine, are both documenting about how there's just this bipartisan support to move on from the Comey kind of era during that time. But again, punts it down the road, and now we're at a point where, again, he's citing in the letter from Tuesday the rationale was based upon what happened in July. Well, then why? Like, it's just the timing of it is so difficult. It's well within his means to. Everyone, you're serving at the pleasure of the president, so it's well within his means. But you just have to wonder, just because you can do something doesn't mean that you necessarily should do something, right? From the biblical perspective, we would look to 1 Corinthians 10:23 that says that with all things that we've been given liberty, but not all things are beneficial for us. And especially in the political theater, not all things are beneficial to do just because you have the power to be able to do it.
Yes. Chelsey, again, from a legal point of view, he's within his rights to do this. It's not the first time an FBI director has been fired. Bill Clinton did that as well. Again, William Sessions, for example.
Absolutely. He has every right as the head executive to fire and replace him. And I think that it takes a while, especially he's been busy with his first 100 days in office, had a lot of goals, including repealing Obamacare, getting some semblance of a budget passed, tax cuts. I mean, he has really been moving and shaking these first 100 days. And I don't think that he would have... I don't think he would have just gotten rid of the director of the FBI without a really, really stellar list of potential replacements. And we know he released 10 today on that list. A lot of them are nonpartisan. A lot of them are more neutral. He's really done a great job, at least in the judicial nomination aspect of seeking people who are very experienced, who have a lot of knowledge and have been around the block a while as advisors. And I think that this will be no different. And I think he will have those surrounding him speaking to, we want a nonpartisan, neutral FBI director, not to mention the amount of oversight Congress will be giving him in this decision and the replacement. And so I think that he knows all eyes are on him and he knows he'll be under a microscope.
Yeah, I mean, you think about some of the appointments that he made, and then he's recognized that he's just taken into account advisors' need. So we look at Neil Gorsuch would be the primary that epitomizes just a great pick that he's made. You look at McMasterson, you look at Mattis, you look at even to the extent of the makeup of his cabinet, that he had a Reince Priebus that kind of represented the establishment, but then he also had Steve Bannon who represented kind of this anti-establishment, and it was melding it together. Just this sense, I'm bringing together a team of disparate voices to be able to satisfy not only the demands, but also try to satisfy just understanding that it's a political machine that you have to know. So hopefully he takes into account and kind of replicates what he's done in the past relative to the appointment.
You know, again, one of the questions we have is who will be the new FBI director? And again, reading from this memo that comes from Rod Rosenstein, he said the director now defends his decision, meaning, of course, James Comey defends his decision by asserting that he believed that Attorney General Loretta Lynch had a conflict. But then he goes on to say the FBI director is never empowered to supplant federal prosecutors and assume command of the Justice Department. So it seems to me you want somebody that is a take-charge person, but he or she, whoever that FBI director is, needs to know where the limits of power might be. And there have been all sorts of names that have been floated, but I really don't think that some of the Republicans being put forward right now as possible nominees are going to actually float in front of the United States Senate. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, we're just living in such a transparent age now. So we were talking about it on Wednesday. No one knew Johnny Carson's political beliefs.
Yes.
You just didn't know that. But Stephen Colbert, on the other hand, it's blatantly clear for us now that we know where he stands. And increasingly, as we live in this constant campaign in this constant political world, it's going to be increasingly harder for us to find individuals that, one, can be fair, and that, two, you can scrub their backgrounds to the extent that it's not necessary that everyone there's no such thing as objectivity. You're looking for fairness. And it's increasingly hard to find fair people, fair and competent people, when everything is just underneath the sunshine laws, I guess you could say, underneath the sun. Like, there's nothing hidden.
I think one strategy he did was to speak to exactly what you are both saying. And he listed several lawmakers off of key enforcement oversight panels. So we've got Representative Gowdy out of South Carolina. He's a Republican who led the congressional probe into Benghazi. You've got some from the House Intelligence Committee. John Cornyn is the Senate Majority Whip. He made the list. So these are people who will have connections and backgrounds beyond just the Trump administration, that I think their own reputations will hopefully speak for themselves.
Yeah. Trey Gowdy would be a very good prosecutor. I just don't know if he's got a chance. And when you get to John Cornyn, would the Senate's confirm John Cornyn? That'd be interesting, because it'd be just like you did with Jeff Sessions.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine. So if you got John Cornyn out, we'll play that for example. We'll extrapolate that out. So John Cornyn goes out, and then you have a special election to fill his. Would it be a special election to fill his seat? And then
Governor Point first.
Yeah, Governor Point, and then special election to fill his seat, and then you've got 2018 coming up, and Ted Cruz is up for re-election. So here in Texas, that would be kind of significant for us, especially since you've got Matthew Dow that just came out yesterday and said that he's not going to run against Ted Cruz, and so that would be pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, it's always something to talk about, isn't that the case?
Yeah.
When we come back from the break, I do want to spend a little bit of time getting into some religious liberty issues. One of the articles we posted here is how regulators turned into speech police. That was one that was in the stream, and we have that as our third article, but also just want to get an update on some of these issues before First Liberty. And the one that we've been talking about quite a bit, Chelsey, before you've joined us, is Monifa Sterling. This is a case that could go before the Supreme Court. And again, Supreme Court 101 takes 4 to take it, 5 to win. And it seems to me that in this particular case, a similar case came in front of Justice Ginsburg when she was at the D.C. court. So isn't it possible that this case that you've been following, this Marine who got in trouble and eventually was court-martialed for posting a verse out of Isaiah, that actually might go to the Supreme Court?
Yes, we are still waiting on the edge of our seats to hear if they will grant cert or decide to hear the case. It went through the equivalent of the Supreme Court of the military, the highest military court in the land, and we received, an unfavorable ruling, and it would decide for the first time, really, by the Supreme Court. It's an unprecedented case that they could take to apply RFRA, religious liberty, rights to military service members, and to essentially say, no, you do not waive your constitutional rights by going to serve to protect those very rights. So we are hoping that they do decide to take the case. There are a lot of people who are obviously very interested and will be affected. Millions of people will be affected by the results. So we certainly do hope that they choose to take the case.
By the way, that is a matter of prayer. And if you'd like to know a little bit more about First Liberty, we have a link to that as well as a link to the Denison Forum. We need to take a break. When we come back, we'll get into a couple of other of these religious liberty cases. But if you'd like to join us, perhaps you have some comments about what has been happening in Washington, D.C. By the way, if you can help us figure this out, we would welcome your phone calls today. It has been a crazy time in which so much has been happening. And yet we also want to talk about some of the advances that have been happening in this administration in the midst of a lot of news and noise. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. If you listen to the program on our weekend edition, you know oftentimes we do focus on religious liberty. And of course, we are privileged to have Chelsey with us today from First Liberty. Of course, Nick is with us as well. But one of the articles we posted by Maggie Gallagher is a little different than one I've seen before, but it just illustrates again how difficult this all is when it comes down to even having a biblical view about marriage. And the story, and I'll summarize a little bit, and both of you have read it, so I'll get your comments as well. This family runs the West Michigan Beef Company, and in the company it says they do what they do for the glory of God. Gotta love that. And so it reminds you of a Chick-fil-A or Hobby Lobby or a variety of others. But they got in trouble with USDA meat inspectors because after there was an article celebrating same-sex marriage, they posted this on the wall, had some comments about it. And then we ran into trouble from the Department of Agriculture, of all things. And that is, they have what's called, or at least under the previous administration, an anti-harassment policy. And so they saw this particular thing on the wall and said that this would be enough to actually no longer have FDA meat inspectors come into their business, which is a quick way of closing down businesses. Now, Chelsey, we've talked about this. We're talking about bakers, photographers, florists, innkeepers. Now we're talking about a meat company. This is really getting out of hand, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I hate to be an alarmist, but there is frankly no end to what the federal government has been using their power and authority to try to accomplish on this front. And it is not just limited to for-profit. So I think the for-profits get a lot of airplay because it's a little bit more uncommon to have a for-profit entity saying, you know, we have Christian values and beliefs that we're open about. But what we have often seen is nonprofits, religious nonprofits of any faith who have sincerely held religious beliefs on these contentious social issues, the federal government will go after them if they have any type of form of grants or receive federal funding or even contracts. Sure. Mm-hmm. We have seen HUD. We have had many homeless shelters call us and saying HUD is trying to negotiate us out of these beliefs and contracts, and adding sexual orientation and gender identity to the laundry list of protected classes that are out there. Well, we know the legislation has not said those are protected classes, and that's not something that the Obergefell decision actually established. They frankly chose not to specifically designate those as protected classes. They treat it more to a constitutional fundamental right akin to the right to an abortion or the right to educate your children as you wish. All that to be said, we have seen many federal entities come and say, you cannot contract with us. We will renegotiate our contracts on these issues. And they come to us desperate saying, how do we adhere to our religious beliefs and continue to operate and function and be licensed?
You know, one of the articles, this article we've posted here, they asked, should Christians in business just stay silent? I raised a question in a commentary a while back. Could Christians even go into certain businesses? You know, if you really are a Christian that have sincerely held biblical beliefs about marriage, would it even be wise for you to be a photographer, at least a wedding photographer, or to be a florist or to be a baker or those kinds of things? But this is one step further. This is not the West Michigan Beef Company saying we're not going to provide beef for your wedding. This is simply says, you know, we posted a picture that was a little bit critical of same-sex marriage, and that was enough for you to basically shut us down. What is up this?
You know, I think we're not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy. Yeah. So we look back 50 years ago, and Christianity, the church was central to the culture, right? Jim Denison speaks about this often, about how Billy Graham was the most admired man on Time magazine. There were blue laws. No word on why they were actually blue. Maybe it was an affinity for the Smurfs. Nevertheless, that you see the church was central to the culture. And then about 20 years ago, we started to see the church being on the periphery of culture. Right. You be your way, my be my way. You go to church on Sunday, that's fine for you. I'm just going to stay here. No big deal. And now what we're starting to see is the church is seen as hostile, or the culture is hostile to the church. And so no longer are we on the periphery, but now the church is seen as dangerous. And so it's Richard Dawkins would say that religion is a virus on the software of humanity that must be expunged. You've got Christopher Hitchens that said religion poison everything, and you've got Frank Bruni of the New York Times saying we're going to force you to believe our sexual ethic. And so
will be forced to believe, yeah.
So what's so discouraging about that is just that you see just this hostility, and it's not just enough to let our be our way anymore, but really is just this pent up frustration and these grudges that have been held for some unbeknownst reason that really do just want to eradicate any form of dissent according to their kind of beliefs. And it's just tragic because if you look back to the American experiment, and correct me if I'm wrong, the founders believed that the practicing of religion, regardless of whether it was Christianity, Judaism, or Muslim, the practicing of religion produced virtuous people. Virtuous people is a good thing for a limited government because that means it's less services that the government would have to provide, so that the government doesn't have to be in the hospital industry, government doesn't have to be in the adoption industry, the government doesn't have to be in the homeless shelter industry. And now we're seeing that religious people aren't seen as virtuous people; they're seen as dangerous people. It's just we're not in Kansas anymore.
We certainly are not. And Chelsey, one of the questions I think some of our listeners would have is that we were hoping there might be an executive order that would address that. And we did go through the executive order that came out on the National Day of Prayer, and it did cover some issues like the Johnson Amendment and others. But I think some people, as they called in, were saying, where's the part about the florists and the photographers? And in this particular case, can't at least the President of the United States tell his Department of Agriculture to back off and stop trying to close down a beef company that is simply holding to a biblical view of marriage?
Yes, I mean, you are absolutely right that we were expecting perhaps a little bit more teeth with the executive order, but there was a clause implemented that said the Attorney General can be consulted on any question of religious liberty. And I think that's a really important clause to note because that means every single agency, all of them, will be reporting to the Attorney General. And if there are questions that arise, we often go through a lot of administrative kangaroo courts or complaints that we have to file on these individuals' behalf. If any of those really are red flagged to the Attorney General can step in and say, how are you guys operating and conducting in a way that protects these valuable rights that people have? And at the end of the day, they have rights. These individuals have rights. We have a constitution with 225 plus years of jurisprudence protecting religious liberty rights. And so as discouraging as it is, and as much as we're seeing vast increases in attacks against religious liberty, we have protections in place. They're just being tested right now. And a lot of this is going to come down to the court system.
I completely agree. And so I love the way that Chelsey put it. So like we do want to celebrate what the administration has done right now relative to the executive order, but we also want to be cognizant of the fact that it is just an executive order.
That's all it's going to have. Yeah. And so, you need laws. That was my next question.
Yeah. And so we have got, and this is this is the beauty of a democratic republic, that we, the people, have the opportunity and the freedoms to be able to petition our lawmakers and our congressmen, our senators, our local city councils, et cetera, to be able to put the pressure on them to be able to enact laws. There used to be a day that Congress would pass laws. I don't know if they're still doing it anymore, but
Not
to
many.
be able to put the pressure on them to pass the laws that won't be subject to change depending upon who's in the executive office.
Right. One, if you're listening and you want to support, is FATA, the First Amendment Defense Act, is one that's before Congress now that would really bolster our protections. But that would be a really good one to contact your government officials on.
And again, what we continue to see time after time after these bills are put up is that the congressmen and that these elected officials are keenly aware of the phone calls that are being made. When you flood their phone banks, they are intimately acquainted with the fact that their constituents have an opinion, and that opinion has a heavy weight upon them. So you light up their phone lines.
Yes. And I might just mention that I think one of the ones we are going to put up as our action item next is that First Amendment Defense Act. So that would, and one of the things that people appreciate about that is sometimes they don't know their member of Congress. You should. But if you don't, that's fine. You just know, if you know your address, it pops it up automatically. We'll give you a suggested thing to write, but then you can also follow up with a phone call. So we make it very easy. And I've had people, Nick and Chelsey, tell me that until I started listening to Point of View, to be honest, I never contacted my member of Congress because I oftentimes didn't know who they were. I didn't know how to get it. I didn't know where the address was. You've made it so easy. I just click on there. You give me the issue. You give me a suggested thing to say. I maybe change one or two words here, add a sentence, and bing, send it. And that's really what we're dedicated to do, because I do believe that ultimately executive orders are nice. Legislation is much more important.
Executive orders, great. They're the temporary fence, though.
Yeah.
We need to establish bounds that are more than just temporary fences, but we need to put some wood down, and we need to do the hard work. And a part of that hard work is we all are participating in this great American experiment, and you have as much a role to play as your congressman does. A congressman, congresswoman has a role to play in this.
Yes. So temporary fence, but you want to build a wall.
That's dangerous.
There did not see that one coming.
There it is. I did not.
By the way, Chelsey, we actually switched roles, so last time got to sit here. Maybe before the end of the show, we'll let you sit here again, so he can give me a bad time. We're going to take a break, and we'll take some phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
A couple of weeks ago, there was an event at the White House honoring Israel on its 69th Independence Day. Vice President Mike Pence gave what has been described as a stirring tribute to this nation, which has traditionally enjoyed close ties with the United States. It's nice to see the U.S. again acting like a friend and ally to Israel, something we saw little of during the previous administration. Then, last week, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas came to Washington, D.C. In discussions, President Trump called him out for the Palestinians' funding of terrorism against innocent Israelis. This, too, is a departure from what we've seen in recent years. Let's hope this change spills over to influence the United Nations to pull back on its mostly abominable treatment of Israel. The United States is the principal founding member of the UN and its largest financial contributor. The U.S. Senate has taken a step toward employing that leverage by admonishing the UN for its blatant anti-Israel bias. Two senators, Marco Rubio of Florida and Chris Coons of Delaware, wrote a letter to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres asking for better treatment of Israel by the UN, and every senator, Republican and Democrat, all 100 of them, signed it. The letter stated that too many of UN member states and agencies use the world body as a vehicle for targeting Israel. The letter specifically called for the elimination or reform of UN standing committees whose principal purpose is to attack Israel and support boycotts, sanctions, and divestment movements against Israel. The senators also critiqued UNESCO, the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, which continually pushes initiatives that are really attempts to delegitimize Israel. And they excoriated the UN's Human Rights Commission, whose obsession with Israel, the letter states, makes a mockery of the council, whose members include some of the world's worst human rights violators. Senator Rubio gave the letter some teeth by sponsoring a bill withholding funding to the UN for targeting Israel. This effort deserves our support. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Let's open up the phones, give you a chance to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. What about this issue of religious liberty? We, again, just using one of those stories of the West Michigan Beef Company, which actually are full of Christians who actually promote that what they do is for the glory of God. And yet they did post an article in their company break room and explain why they felt that same-sex marriage was against God's will. And that was enough to bring on their heads the anti-harassment policy statement that was crafted under the previous administration, and the Secretary of Agriculture then threatened that they would no longer bring in USDA meat inspectors, essentially ending the business there in Michigan. Now, I think most people, even if you are not necessarily that sympathetic to people that would disagree with LGBT ideas, would still nevertheless say, I don't know about this. This is, a little bit heavy-handed. So we've talked about remedies. One are executive orders. The other is, of course, the First Amendment Defense Act. But the question I want to put on the table before I take some phone calls is, are we in such a politicized environment that it would really be difficult to even pass something as simple as that? When the religious liberty provisions that actually came about in the 1990s were first put forward, what's called RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, you had Chuck Schumer in the Senate supporting it, and it was basically unanimous, wasn't it, Chelsey?
Yep, that's right. It was unanimously passed. Bill Clinton signed it into law, and it was actually meant to protect religious liberty rights that the Supreme Court, Scalia actually drafted the majority opinion, had narrowed the rights down, or the standards for infringing on those rights, and Congress, in a resounding response, unanimously passed RFRA to reinstate those high levels and standards, those high bars. And now we're seeing, anytime a state is even still considering a RFRA, it's now a dirty word. And the truth is, we have to remember what these laws are actually about, and that is allowing a marketplace of ideas and beliefs. It's about respecting true diversity, which means minority religious factions. And I think our country was established on protecting the religious rights of minority groups because they're so easily trampled on. It is the First Amendment for a reason. It's the first protection in the First Amendment of our Constitution. Speech and press are even drafted after that. And so just remembering how important these rights truly, truly are, and that these bills are meant to just reinstate those. I think it's interesting to see the look on people's faces when I now say, I'm a religious liberty attorney, because it used to be, you're a constitutional attorney. I was really received great feedback on that. And now if I go to a recruiting event and I say that, students in law school, their eyes get big, and it's considered almost a toxic word now that I'm a religious.
Isn't that amazing?
Yes, the tide has certainly turned.
We are just, so I think about it, and I know I'm trying to think about instances from the historical standpoint that we've ever been as divided as we are as a country right now. And so I don't want to, I will say this is one of the more divided times that we've ever been. And so when I think about it from a biblical perspective, I'm reminded of the axiom of a house divided will not stand. Mm-hmm. And so as we're increasingly divided, what I think is becoming what's a feature of this polarized society is the sense that there's a lack of trust with one another. And so 51% of Americans don't know their neighbors' names. 25% of Americans, if something significant happened to them, they don't have someone to turn to talk about. And just the lack of trust with the media, I think it's at 26%, believe that the media is to be trusted. 39% view Nickelback favorably. So even Nickelback's doing better than the media right now. And so what's happened when you don't trust the media is this rise of fake news. And what I think is going to be increasingly, if I'm just pessimistic about this, is the sense that there's just this fragility that's happening to the foundation where we can't even agree what yes is yes and right is right. Yes is yes, no is no. And when we have this divisiveness, which it's toxic, it's just saturating the air right now. And what's probably the difficult thing for me, just looking at it from a millennial and then from a conservative standpoint, is it's not simple. It's just halfway. We're identifying the wrong. I think both sides of the aisle are very quick to say that's wrong, or that's inconsistent, or that just doesn't even make sense. But no one's saying what's right anymore. Like we're not putting forward any ideas. And so from a conservative standpoint, I feel as though Edmund Burke is probably rolling over in his grave right now, because it's Edmund Burke, it's the forefathers, Edmund Burke and Irving Kristol. And then Russell Kirk says that it wasn't just enough for us to identify the wrong, but to revive the dream by igniting our moral consciences in order that we might move forward. Taking the line from T.S. Eliot, the time that we have to revive the dream, revive the idea. So it's not simply just identifying the wrong, it's putting forward what is right, because we believe it's true and we believe it's good and it's tested from the past and it can work in the future.
Well, I will add to that and say that we have seen, it is so encouraging, and our listeners should be encouraged that you cannot darken the light, mm-hmm. and that I only have a job because Christians and believers or of any faith even will call us and say, my rights are infringed. I know I have rights, and I'm willing to courageously stand up and put my neck out there and stand against the institutions infringing those rights. And so I'm honored to represent them. But beyond that, we're winning. We are winning this battle. The rights are fairly established. I think we need more and more strong protections, as we've talked about. They're being tested in the courts. But we still are winning 90% of our cases that we file, or through settlements or through mediation. And we've found that shedding light on the darkness and often just pointing out what the government is doing to the American people, educating the American people, they take a stand in the end.
That's good.
You know, I was just thinking too, and we'll come back to after the break and maybe talk about this a little bit more. The first article I posted was from Alan Dershowitz. Now, Alan Dershowitz would be a liberal. He calls himself a progressive. He's been on the program with us twice. So, you know, we've really given him an opportunity. Oftentimes when we're talking about Israel or Hamas or things like that, or the Iranian deal. But here, President Trump did not obstruct justice. And we've posted that because it, I think, provides for me a model of what needs to take place. We need some liberals to start acting like liberals, because you know as well as I do, Nick, that the liberal vision, and this goes all the way back to Voltaire, who said, you know, I may passionately disagree with your view, but I will defend your right to hold to that view. And we just need some people to simply say, look, you know, you may not like the religious liberty issue that an individual has, but we need to just get some common sense into here and recognize that if we take away the religious liberty of these Christians who we think are Neanderthals, pretty soon we lose our religious liberty too, our non-religious liberty. And so we need some people like an Alan Dershowitz and some others to stand up and say, this is the foundation of what America was. This is the foundation of Western culture, and we do to our demise taking this the wrong direction.
I completely agree. And so I again, like, I think ideologue has almost become a negative word now.
Right.
Like, understanding your ideology, like, we're all operating from an ideology, like understanding what are those foundational beliefs that you're operating from. Now what the problem is that we're no longer ideologues. We're just fanboys and girls. We're afraid to call out, afraid to call out our side when our side's wrong. And from the biblical perspective, faithful are the wounds of a friend. Wound your brother if he's not acting according to the principles, right? Whether it's the Christian standpoint, whether it's the conservative standpoint, whether it's the liberal standpoint. So with Chuck Schumer, for example, why was he making such a big fuss? I think about Gorsuch, the Gorsuch nomination. You passed it. You were voting in favor of him early. Nothing has changed relative to his judicial philosophy from that particular point. So liberals need to wound Donald Trump. Let's wound. Let's call out right for right and wrong for wrong. And just because I criticize him doesn't mean I don't support him. That we believe in this free speech, and that our founders enshrine this, and so we need to exercise it in a way that still respects the person, but respects our principles just as much as we respect the person.
Well said. Well, we need to take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation. If you'd like to join us in the second hour, 1-800-351-1212. And if you'd like to know a little bit more about First Liberty, we have a link to that website. And if you'd like to know more about the Denison Forum, we have a link there as well. And in the second hour, we'll spend a little bit more time talking about all the resources that are there. Be in prayer, as we just mentioned a minute ago, about this one case that's maybe going to make it to the Supreme Court. It'd be fascinating. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Does point of view make any difference? I think Dr. Eric Walsh would say it does. Dr. Walsh was fired from his job as district health director for the state of Georgia, not because of anything he did or failed to do on the job, but because of sermons he preached in his local church. What does that have to do with point of view? Jeremy Dyes of First Liberty represented Dr. Walsh, and in February, the state of Georgia paid a large settlement for their religious discrimination. And Jeremy Dyes became an attorney specializing in defending religious liberty, greatly because of what he learned listening to Point of View Radio as a child. That is the kind of difference you make when you support the Truth Team, but we can't make that difference without your help. Become a partner today in this important mission of speaking truth in love. Join the Truth Team at pointofview.net/team. Choose your giving level, stretch a bit, and please do it today. Or call 800-347-5151. pointofview.net/team. Or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Nick and Chelsey in studio with us today. We'll talk about their websites in just a minute, and I'll get to one of those phone calls. But I thought since we were talking religious liberty, let's talk about the great victory this week for First Liberty. And it has to do with a man that we've talked about. It's been a while, and his name was Walter Tutka. And he actually found himself in a very difficult situation. If I remember right, he was a substitute teacher there in New Jersey. And just having a Bible can get you in trouble in the public schools anymore. And so, again, this was a case, I guess, that went through the EEOC, the Employment Opportunity Commission. And tell us a little bit more what finally was resolved.
Yes, we were very excited to announce that on the eve of us filing a lawsuit, the school district finally agreed to reinstate Walt Tutka as a substitute teacher. And that's all we were asking for. He just wanted his job back. He wanted the ability to continue to serve and get to know these students. And he was terminated because a student asked him.
Yeah, he's quoting from the Bible. Yeah.
Yes, he quoted from the Bible. Mm-hmm. A line of students was walking out the door, and he said, the common phrase that the first shall be last and the last shall be first. And one of the students asked him, where was that from? And he said the Bible. And the student went home and came back and said, I don't have a Bible. Do you have one? And can you give it to me so I can read it from there? And so when that happened, someone else saw it in the hallway and reported him. The student felt distraught that this teacher lost his job over the issuing of a Bible at his request. And so obviously that was very devastating for Walt Tutka, but we have been, in the EEOC wheelhouse, trying to get this resolved and just get him reinstated. And that happened this week.
Nick, I was just thinking that if they were to see a teacher hand maybe a pornographic magazine to a student, I could see why you would want to get him out of the schools. But I fear that they probably would do less if they handed him a pornographic magazine than the fact that he handed a Bible. Is there something wrong here?
I have. This is lunacy right now, right?
We keep thinking they're making these up. Every time Kelly Shackover comes in here, I said, this has got to be from The Onion.
We have that obstacle a lot. People do not believe
Night Live. This
fake news, fake news. No, I mean, it's lunacy. I
handed a Bible to a kid as a gift, and you're out.
Teachers already have enough burdens right now, right? Teachers are going through so much. I'm so grateful for teachers and just the lengths that they're willing to go, the sacrifices that they're willing to make, and just the pressures of tests that they're having to endure, and the difficulties that they already have to put up with right now. And then to add this on top of it, they're already spending their own money to provide resources for for their classrooms. It just befuddles me.
Yeah.
Befuddles me.
Yeah.
And befuddles a great word.
When this guy's speechless, you got him.
Yeah. I'm going to start turning into corny jokes now if you don't watch out.
Well, again, the victory is for him, but it seems to me that some of the things you're looking for, Chelsey, are precedents. And it seems to me that there are still the need to get some precedents to establish what we always assumed, and that is teachers don't lose their constitutional rights either at the schoolhouse gate. And we, of course, have a Supreme Court decision that say that students don't lose their rights at schoolhouse gate. There are some limitations because you do represent the university, you do represent the high school, you do represent the grade school. Got that. But it does seem to me that a substitute teacher handing a Bible to a kid is enough to get thrown out on his ear. Well, I'm glad you got the victory, but we need some more precedents in the future, don't we?
That's right. We do need more precedents on this front. Fortunately, we do have some research on this front on our website. We have a protection kit and guide for teachers and students alike. So students who want to be able to say Merry Christmas or tell their friends about the Lord or even read their Bible during free time in class, those rights are all clearly established and protected. So we have a rights kit for students, but also, as you're mentioning, a rights kit for teachers who are employees, but they also don't lose their rights. They just have to be very neutral and limited in the actual classroom and during the actual class time.
Yeah, and so that's the judicial, I would say that's the judicial, and that's the beautiful thing, to continue to stand up, to continue to recognize that you have your rights. But then from the cultural standpoint of where we're at, again, we're seeing the cause of Christ continue to be seen as hostile. And even though it's seen as hostile, the cause of Christ is seen as hostile. The good works of Christ are still very receptive. And so while there's the reactive nature and the judicial side of things, we want to be proactive on that and be sources of light, be people that are the fragrant aroma of Christ in our buildings, and seek to continue to try to shower with love and grace and try to do everything that we can so that they might not be able to find an ounce of guilt within us. It's going to be increasingly important in this hostile culture.
So again, one of the questions that was on the screen here, and she had to leave, but I'll just ask it for her, was, how does this whole issue of religious liberty relate to some of the medical issues? You have vaccines. Of course, the extreme example, which I saw one of the late night shows, was what about Jehovah's Witnesses and blood transfusions and things like that. This is, I think, going to be one of the places where maybe those who don't believe in religious liberty are saying, yes, but you have some religious views here that are harmful to my children. So how do we kind of draw that line? Have you thought that through at all?
That's a really good question, and one, they're always looking to magnify the danger, right?
Yes.
So they're going to point to the most extreme cases. We see this all the time and say, well, spare the rod, spoil the child. Christians want. I've seen that argument in a House committee at the Texas legislature. Someone made that argument that Christians could use this as an excuse to beat children. Not in the state of Texas, people. Absolutely not. So that there is a standard, and the standard is there a compelling government interest in limiting the religious liberty right? And compelling interests are things that cause harm to individuals, harm to property, safety and security. Another compelling interest the government has, and I think this would be important for Trump's executive order on immigration, is to know that national security is a compelling interest. And so they can limit some religious liberty rights in the context of this small and narrow exception, and that is someone's life at stake? Is there security or health issue at stake? So that's where that line is pretty simply drawn.
Again, I don't watch Grey's Anatomy, but I just happened to be walking in when my daughter happened to be watching it. And the premise was this guy who has got he's kind of a religious fundamentalist, think backwoods, Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia.
Not Tennessee, Kentucky. It's just Kentucky
really,
people.
And just really obnoxious guy. I wanted to punch him in the nose, and he's all upset because they intervened on behalf of his child. But it illustrated to me that Hollywood is creating this meme right now, this idea that you religious people, you're not just misguided, you are really dangerous to the future of America. You're dangerous to your children. So this is another place where we're going to have to start thinking and maybe counter-programming, aren't we?
That's right. I definitely think that's the narrative that the other side takes. Everything is very extreme and very negative, and they put a lot of malice behind believers. And so I think it's just believers about truth, speak truth in love, and at the end of the day, it's a matter of the heart.
Yeah, and this isn't anything new. The first century Christians were known for their love feasts, whereby they were drinking blood and eating flesh. When in reality, they were just people that were known by their love.
Snakes, anyone?
Yeah, that were literally partaking in the elements of Christ. And so we always have had this negative reputation, but it's always been our good works that have always counteracted that.
Yeah, and Rodney Snark's books are probably some of the best. We've had him on, and we'll have him on again in the future because he's got a new book out that reminds us of some of that. Let's take a break. We'll talk about the World Summit in the Defense of Persecuted Christians. That took place this week. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Dennis Prager has been making the case that the chasm between the left and the rest of the country is so unbridgeable that it should be described as a second civil war. He usually adds that unlike the first Civil War, this war is not violent. Now he's even removing that disclaimer. He now believes violence is coming. In one sense, you could say that violence is already here. He reminds us that left-wing thugs engage in violence and threats of violence with utter impunity. They shut down speakers at colleges, block highways, bridges, and airport terminals, take over college buildings and offices, occupy state capitals, and terrorize individuals in their homes. He also explains that it's beginning to dawn on many Americans that mayors, police chiefs, and college presidents have no interest in stopping this violence. Left-wing officials sympathize with the lawbreakers, and the police, who rarely sympathize with thugs of any ideology, are ordered to do nothing by emasculated police chiefs. Now you might think that a few of these leaders would change their minds and realize they must do something to protect citizens in society and students on campus. That is unlikely because they have made their peace with left-wing violence. What they fear is left-wing media. Just imagine the media backlash that would rain down upon their heads if in protecting citizens and students anyone in a liberal activist group was injured. They would be pilloried by the press. This leads to an important question. If these mayors, police chiefs, and college presidents will do little to stop the violence, who will? Left-wing mobs will only be allowed to own the streets for so long before other Americans decide to take matters into their own hands. We can hope that that does not happen and plead for restraint, but I think Dennis Prager is right. The second Civil War could become violent. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Wanted to move to another issue that is certainly one that we talk about so often here on Point of View. As a matter of fact, Monday we had Tom Doyle on as we talked about his new book, Standing in the Fire, and his earlier book, Killing Christians. But this week there has been the World Summit in Defense of Persecuted Christians. And this was encouraging, first of all, that Vice President Mike Pence spoke at that. Of course, Franklin Graham spoke there. My own pastor, interestingly enough, Jack Graham also spoke, to mention just a few. And this was an attempt to really bring attention to persecuted Christians around the world and to recognize this as an important issue, even though after Franklin Graham posted his op-ed in USA Today, you had almost every atheist in the country writing some kind of snarky response to it. That is still an important issue. And when we talk about persecution here in America, that's with a small p. But when you talk about persecution overseas, it's with a capital P, especially in the Middle East. And Tom Doyle and I were even talking about earlier in the week, something I've mentioned during Passion Week, that from Palm Sunday to Easter is really one of the most dangerous times of the year for Christians in the Middle East. So again, we have to recognize that we have brothers and sisters in the Lord over there, and this was, I think, a very good conference to just try to get some national and international attention to the fact that there are so many persecuted Christians, and we need to think about what we can do to pray for them and defend them.
Yeah, again, you think about what's happening right now in Iraq and Syria with everything from ISIS and just the hostility that's just characteristic of that land right now, and that really is central. That's the Fertile Crescent, and that's where that's where Christianity really did see the genesis of it start to come about. And now the Christians are fleeing from there just because of the persecution and death, and just the sense that there's just for believing who you are, believing in what you do, is enough to be able to end your life. And it's just so tragic to see what's happening over there right now.
Well, and again, if you want to understand that not only are some fleeing, but some are staying, one of the stories we told earlier the week, he was in this book, Killing Christians, but also in the new one, Standing in the Fire. Farid is actually staying in Syria, wow. And he is an evangelist there. And last time we talked with Farid, and that's the name we've made up for him, but you can understand that's the one we all use for him. He was telling us that he had 30 different death threats. We said, well, how do you know 30? He says, well, because on my apartment, they number them. I'm going to kill you with this, or I'm going to kill your family like this. And the person that was probably most antagonistic towards him is a man by the name of Ahmad. Again, made up name, but we know who he is. And so finally, after all this back and forth, Farid finally decided to go to his house and knock on his door. Now, in the Arab world, if you do that, you have to let people in, and it's a place of sanctuary. And so the wife let him in. Then Ahmad comes into the room, and of course, this is a man he said he was going to kill. So he begins to back off, said, maybe I won't kill you after all. And so then Farid gives him a Bible, and so he holds it kind of like this, almost like it's radioactive, and sets it aside. Well, this all took place in a place called Homs, which is in Syria. That was bombed out, and as a result, everybody was panicked. And Ahmad finally came to the conclusion that there was really nothing of comfort or encouragement in the Quran. So as a last resort, he started to read the Bible. So then when Farid comes back to him and says, okay, if you say you're going to kill me, do it right now. And there's this pregnant pause in which Ahmad says, no, I cannot, because I'm your brother. Wow. And there's another pregnant pause because he's become a Christian. Wow. And he tells the story that he started reading the Bible at 7 p.m., and by 6 a.m. he said he came to love Jesus.
Wow.
Oh,
now,
wow.
that's what happens when you stay there. But, we wonder how long Farid will stay there. But that's why the new book is called Standing in the Fire, because Joel Rosenberg said, well, these are like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're standing in the fire.
Yeah, that comment reminds me of Martin Luther, right? Here I stand, I can do no else. And here I am. And just to recognize, just stand in just the reality of what the biblical narrative paints. Like in John 16:33, Jesus promises us we will have trouble, that Paul is going to tell young Timothy that indeed all who desire to live a godly life will be persecuted. From 2 Timothy 3:12, Peter's going to tell his people in 1 Peter 4:12 that don't be surprised at the fiery ordeal that you come among. But then you see the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that even though you go through the fire, that you don't go through it alone. Yeah. And you are always led in victory whenever you're following after the Lord. Mm-hmm. And it's not just a modern day testimony.
That really is. And again, you think about how we sometimes, Chelsey, don't want to share our faith because, well, they might get their feelings hurt or it just might be awkward. And you think of Farid over there in Syria, and these are all Alawites, by the way. This is kind of a small sect, if you will, of Islam, because there are many more Sunnis over there. And yet, of course, the head of the leaders in Syria is an Alawite, and a lot of the Sunnis saying we should be in control of all of that. But nevertheless, it's just an attempt to try to bring attention to the fact that persecuted Christians exist in many countries around the world. And it used to be that the closed countries, when I was growing up, were the communist countries. And, of course, North Korea is still closed and some of those. But now most of the closed countries are the Muslim countries, aren't they?
That's right. And, Vice President Pence actually said that this was nothing short of a genocide against Christians in the Middle East, and that it is increasing at an unprecedented rate. The statistics say over 215 million Christians confront intimidation, abuse, or assault worldwide, and that's just for following the gospel. But we also know that the Bible says, in the end times, these attacks will increase, and we can expect that. But as Nick, as you said, that we are children of the Lord, and He protects us, and He gives us the words to say to withstand that, and that we need to be in prayer for our brothers and sisters, and also come up with solutions to protect them.
Yeah, I'm even seeing it's what Tertullian said in the 2nd century. Like what he said has proven to be true, that the blood of the martyrs is the seedbed for the church. Mm-hmm. And what you're seeing around the world is, though there's increased persecution, there's also a great awakening that's happening around the world. Jim Denison has wrote so much on this, and it just puts it so well when he just documents that right now there are upwards of 60 million Christians in communist China. Communist China will probably be the largest Christian country
in the world.
And
Isn't that amazing?
100,000 is the conservative estimate that are coming to faith in Christ every week in China. You look at what's happening in Cuba right now. Over the past 10 years, 10 million people have come to know Christ. You look at South Korea right now. South Korea will be one half evangelical by 2050. The gospel is on the move. What C.S. Lewis says in Chronicles of Narnia, that Aslan is on the move. And one of the beautiful truths is wherever he's leading, there's always going to be victory. And so that's what we can really take comfort in. And though it appears as though there's loss, in reality, what we recognize is the cross of Christ, which always paints. Temporary loss always fades away and melts into the glory of Christ.
Let's take some phone calls. We'll go to Missouri, KNEO. Mike, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, yeah, I was I listen to you. I listen to Jay Sekulow. I do a lot of reading, and then I listen to the morning news, and I go, that's not what I heard, and I just think, the news media, I know they're trying to, want people to listen to them, and that they're all knowing, and I think they want to listen to them, and they want people to listen to them. They're like the National Enquirer on steroids.
That is a good point because, a lot of what is right now is noise, not news. If you really want to get down to it, I really do not care whether or not Donald Trump gets 2 scoops of ice cream or not.
I'm a little bitter because of it, but nevertheless, it's just, we're just very much want to be entertained, and we only pay attention only insofar as we're entertained.
Yeah, and we've done a number of programs even this week talking about how the phones are changing us and lowering our attention span, and all of this is focused on entertainment. And if nothing else, he was saying, well, I hear different things. Well, the bottom line is every single one of these comments we've made today has at least an article with it. I mentioned the one that we have by Alan Dershowitz, so you can read that. We have the one about James Comey, have the one about the regulators as speech police, and then this one on World Summit on Persecuted Christians. Because lots of times I want to say, don't believe it because I say it. Don't believe it because Nick says it in the daily briefing. Don't believe it just because Chelsey says it, as smart as she is. Read it for yourself, and you'll come to the same conclusion, right?
Yeah. Again, one of the beautiful things about a democratic republic is we have the opportunity to have free speech. Our founders recognized the truth that there is great. These are serious issues that we're wrestling with, and so they equipped us with the ability to be able to wrestle with these issues. And we might disagree towards the ends, but I think we might disagree towards the means, but I think we're all moving towards the ends, which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we want to continue to pursue after that with all the vigor that we can.
Let's, if we can, take a break, and we'll take some more phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. Nick mentioned the Civil War, and of course, yesterday, interestingly enough, I posted a commentary by Dennis Prager on the Second Civil War, and he's always said that the Second Civil War we're going through right now is unlike the First Civil War. This war is not violent. Then he changed his disclaimer, so we'll talk about what's happening on the college campuses and in some of the capitals, and get your comments if you'd like to join us. 1-800-351-1212.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Nick and Chelsey here. And just for a minute, before we go on to some of the issues I put on the table, Nick, talk about the Denison Forum. Jim Denison is an individual that we've had on the program many times, and of course you work with him and you do the daily briefing. But as people go to the Denison Forum, you, of course, are the Director of Cultural Engagement. Talk about what is available on that website.
Yeah, so Denison Forum, what we try to do is try to identify the cultural issues that you're talking about around the proverbial water cooler, and then try to engage those issues with biblical truth. And kind of our principal product is Jim Denison's daily article, and that daily article goes out to around 115,000 people, 203 countries, where he takes one news article of the day and really tries to help us think biblically about it, in probably about a 550-word essay. Sends it out every morning, 5 days a week. And then also I put together what's called the daily briefing. And so daily briefing is just if Jim takes one article, I take anywhere from 9 to 14 articles that either one, that I believe are going to be driving the day, or two, reveal the spirit of the day and help us to better understand how do we think about these issues from a biblical perspective.
And again, Denison Forum. The other one is firstliberty.org. First of all, let me just encourage you to support that organization. I've been supporting it back in the days when this was just an idea that Kelly Shackelford had. And so that has certainly been something to see how it's grown so dramatically. But also sign up to get the prayer updates, because, again, we're encouraging people right now, Chelsey, to pray about this case, Monica Sterling, to go to the Supreme Court and thus provide religious freedom, rights, and liberty to people that serve in the military.
That's right. I really appreciate your support, because we are the largest organization in the entire country dedicated to religious liberty. And we have our work cut out for us. I can tell you that right now. We publish a book called Undeniable every year, and it just accounts the instances of religious hostility in America, whether someone's job is threatened or they're fired, etc. And it has over doubled in the last 3 years. Those numbers have doubled to about 1,400 this year. So the need is out there, and we want to help meet it. If any of you listeners have any issues that you think could be a religious liberty or First Amendment infringement in your life, just give us a call, and we'd be happy to help advise you or take a look.
I might even mention that when Undeniable came out a number of years ago, I think Tony Perkins co-published it with you, and it was about that thick. Now it's about that thick. So I mean, you can just see physically all the various cases that indeed have made such a profound impact on our society, and why you still have to turn down many more cases than you take, right?
Oh, yes. We turn down, I mean, I would say probably 80% of people who call us just out of sheer bandwidth issues. But
just out of the time.
We're happy to serve, and we really do try to champion religious faith for all and belief in the public sphere.
And again, she's chief of staff there. And so if you have questions about First Liberty, go to that website. And again, follow some of the cases that are very important. Okay, Nick, you mentioned something. The daily article today, Jim Denison talked about Betsy DeVos and being booed at an African-American college. Now, you've got to understand, she was also there with Omaroso. So first of all, you have an African-American woman who's been with Donald Trump. Then you have Betsy DeVos and the work that she and Omaroso and other individuals have done to help African-American students. Nevertheless, they booed her. I've watched some of the video, and you can barely even hear what she's saying. Now, I just spoke at a commencement, not at yours, but another one down the road. And it's hard enough to speak at a commencement because of crying babies and people that are antsy for wanting to see that. But when you're just booing or you're turning your back on a commencement speaker, this is, again, just an illustration of the kind of hostility that individuals, if they're conservative, are facing right now in the universities.
Yeah, so we just think about it from a holistic. We'll go 30,000 square feet. And so this is a university, like I've continued to say, it's just this place of ideas. It's where young curiosity meets old wisdom, and time and test it again. And so it's this clashing of ideas that, one, we see innovation happen relative to ideas, and just the body of knowledge gets expanded. But also on the second, we see ignorance squelched, because what was not known is now known. But what's so frustrating is what you're seeing is not just the silencing that's happening on college campuses across the country, but just this unwillingness to be able to listen to one another, to try to silence it. And so the NAACP chairman came on CNN 2 nights ago, and
I saw that.
And so what his argument was is he said that they weren't booing to show disrespect to her, but disagreement with her policies. And what was so frustrating about that's frustrating is, one, it's not disrespectful. It's disrespectful to her, but it's also disrespectful to themselves to hold yourself to a higher standard. You're literally graduating. These aren't just graduates. There were also staff members that were also booing and turned their backs. If you're not willing to entertain contrarian ideas, how do you expect to grow? Because inevitably we all think very highly of ourselves. That Montaigne says that our rump is the loftiest throne upon which we sit. And so we all think very highly of ourselves, but we've got to be challenged by one another. And the idea that you can't challenge somebody anymore is not, one, it's not biblical anymore. And two, it just is a way to be able to kind of just see our brains just begin to shrink because we just refuse to entertain contrarian ideas.
If again you have somebody up there that was part of the KKK or white supremacists or something like this. This is a woman, like Betsy DeVos or not, you've got to say that she has done an enormous amount for the African American students and been a champion of school choice and a variety of other issues. And I would say she's done more for African Americans than Jane Fonda is going to do this week. Jane Fonda is going to Detroit arguing for raising the minimum wage, which is a guarantee to make sure that more African American teenagers don't get a job. So of the two, who's going to get applauded in the press? Jane Fonda. But who has really done more in terms of dollars and projects to help African American students than a person like a Betsy DeVos?
And what's just so frustrating about this is just even apart from the race issue, that you would just boo your commitment. That's just disrespectful. This is a civilization. We're losing civility in the civilization because we can't respect one another. That's the most discouraging. I'm not even asking them to be Christians. I'm just asking them to be respectful.
Civil. No, if this was Texas A&M University, they would be hissing because Texas A&M decided that we can't boo on campus. Hissing is much classier.
But I've been to graduations at Texas A&M. I remember my own graduation at Yale and other places, and I've spoken at some graduations. I bet you had a commencement yesterday where you did not boo the speaker, right?
I wanted. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't want to. No, I'm just kidding, Jake. But again, I just think it's just so disrespectful. It's just so disrespectful.
It's just hard to believe.
It's just, we're a civilization. When we lose this ability, we turn into just this archaic, closed-minded place that's not going to be prosperous for anyone.
Well, let me come to my commentary today. I write a daily commentary, and this one's on the Second Civil War, and it's really based upon Dennis Prager. And, of course, he's been on the program with us a couple of times, and he said, as I said, that the Second Civil War that he believes we're going through right now is unlike the First Civil War because it is not violent, but then he had to remove the disclaimer. In his most recent column, he said, left-wing thugs engage in violence and threats and violence with utter impunity. They shut down speakers at colleges, block highways, bridges, and airport terminals, take over college buildings and offices, occupy state capitals, and terrorize individuals at their homes, which, again, is something unprecedented. And he said it's beginning to dawn on many Americans that mayors, police chief, and college presidents have no interest in stopping this violence. Left-wing officials sympathize with the lawbreakers and the police, who rarely sympathize with thugs of any ideology, but they're ordered to do nothing by emasculated police chiefs. What happens if the booing turns into brickbats and all sorts of violence?
Just like what happened at Middlebury. No one has yet to be punished because of what happened at Middlebury right now. Yes, Charles Murray has different ideas, but the fact that doesn't mean that you have to physically try to harm him and then harm the professor there. It just blows my mind.
I think what's most shocking to me, and the question I always come back to when I'm trying to reconcile this in my mind, is what are people afraid of? why are people afraid to even engage in a dialogue on issues or to be able to discuss views that differ from their own? I think the only way that people should be able to come to a principled view of themselves and of issues is by vetting those issues and looking at the pros and cons and having logical discussions. And even if you come to a disagreement, I think what is the fear involved in disagreeing with someone? And instead what is happening is they are projecting not only disagreement with a person's views, but the individual. And they're completely combined.
Yeah, I completely agree on that. And we've talked about this on Wednesday. It's just this idea that our ideas now are also our ideas are also our identity now.
Yes.
And so when you attack my ideas, you attack my identity, and that's a sense of being. And whenever someone's attacking my identity, of course a fear is going to arise out of that. I quickly learned in the PhD program that my ideas were not my identity. If that was the case, then I would be a beat down individual, because at the end of the day, I know that Socrates knew it to be true that he was the smartest man in the world because he didn't know everything. Yeah. Now we're living in a day where individuals think they're the smartest people in the world because they do know everything. And the reality of the matter is we don't. And when we have that teachable, humble posture that David Brooks speaks so much about, that's when we begin to be able to see the beauty of community and coming together towards prosperity.
Humility, not hubris. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
A couple of weeks ago, there was an event at the White House honoring Israel on its 69th Independence Day. Vice President Mike Pence gave what has been described as a stirring tribute to this nation, which has traditionally enjoyed close ties with the United States. It's nice to see the U.S. again acting like a friend and ally to Israel, something we saw little of during the previous administration. Then, last week, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas came to Washington, D.C. In discussions, President Trump called him out for the Palestinians' funding of terrorism against innocent Israelis. This, too, is a departure from what we've seen in recent years. Let's hope this change spills over to influence the United Nations to pull back on its mostly abominable treatment of Israel. The United States is the principal founding member of the UN and its largest financial contributor. The U.S. Senate has taken a step toward employing that leverage by admonishing the UN for its blatant anti-Israel bias. Two senators, Marco Rubio of Florida and Chris Coons of Delaware, wrote a letter to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres asking for better treatment of Israel by the UN, and every senator, Republican and Democrat, all 100 of them, signed it. The letter stated that too many of UN member states and agencies use the world body as a vehicle for targeting Israel. The letter specifically called for the elimination or reform of UN standing committees whose principal purpose is to attack Israel and support boycotts, sanctions, and divestment movements against Israel. The senators also critiqued UNESCO, the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, which continually pushes initiatives that are really attempts to delegitimize Israel. And they excoriated the UN's Human Rights Commission, whose obsession with Israel, the letter states, makes a mockery of the council, whose members include some of the world's worst human rights violators. Senator Rubio gave the letter some teeth by sponsoring a bill withholding funding to the UN for targeting Israel. This effort deserves our support. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes today. It's again our weekend edition, a roundtable conversation. And one of the other people that I quote from, and this will be in a commentary coming out next week, is Dr. Everett Piper. He's president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University. And he wrote something recently on the birth of free speech. And I thought it was kind of interesting because in the one sense, he's really been trying to plead with his fellow presidents and professors and faculty member to really come back to this millennia-old idea of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of inquiry, freedom of thought. You know, is really trying to deal with these safe spaces and these speech codes and all of the rest. So he goes on to explain that he says that the answer to the riots and rebellions that Berkeley and many other college campuses are facing is not found in the tyranny of false tolerance or the ideological safety of trigger warnings. It isn't found in more restrictions and more legalism. It's found, he thinks, in truth, the pursuit of truth, and the practice and virtue of love, and quotes from C.S. Lewis. Then he goes on to say that the administrator there at the University of California at Berkeley says that basically Berkeley is the home of free speech. Well, Dr. Everett Piper there at Oklahoma Wesleyan University put it this way. You know, human freedom, intellectual or otherwise, was not born in Berkeley, California, but rather in a community called Bethlehem some 2,000 years ago. He went on to even talk about the fact that in some respects we can find the home for free speech not in a campus near the sandy beaches of our West Coast, but rather in a stable under the stars in ancient Israel, which I thought was kind of interesting. And again, I don't think some people hearing this might say, that's really radical. You can't say that. But let's talk about history for just a minute, because most of the major universities in Europe, Nick, you're going to be in Italy pretty soon, were founded by Christians. The whole university movement really comes from that as well. You look at some of the major universities in this country, the first 100, almost 200 years, they were all founded by Christians. The motto, I looked it up the other day for Harvard, because some people are talking about the Harvard motto is Veritas. Well, no, it's not. It's Veritas Christo Ecclesiae, which means truth for Christ and the church. That's the actual motto of Harvard University. And so these are universities that were founded on the idea of truth, really biblical truth, but also the interchange of ideas. And that's not really happening anymore.
Yeah. So if Berkeley's Berkeley's the home of free speech, that home's been foreclosed. So it's not there anymore. But again, I think the Christian perspective is just going to understand that we don't have a handle on all truth, but we do have an understanding that we're all pursuing after truth. And I think that's what you continue to see throughout the biblical narrative. You look all the way in Proverbs and what Solomon's going to say in Proverbs 2, 4, and 5, that we're pursuing after truth, like it's that of silver or if it's that of gold. You see the prophet Isaiah saying that, come, let us reason together, let us grapple together. You see in Genesis 32, Jacob wrestling in the dream, wrestling with what? Wrestling with an angel who is the Lord, who is what it says in 1 Corinthians 1:30, who's wisdom and the truth. And so what we see is there's always been this grappling of truth, this corresponding with reality, if we go Aristotelian. And it's this corresponding with reality to such an extent so that we might understand the truth and be able to live in light of the truth so that we might be able to bring about prosperity, not only for ourselves, but also for the communities that we're in.
You know, one of the things he says here is honesty demands that we boldly pursue ideas tested by time, defended by reason, validated by experience, and confirmed by revelation. You know, isn't that kind of the best model for what a Christian university should be?
Yeah, and, you know, so if I switch it over and I think about from the political side, much has been made, like especially, or I don't want to say especially, in some churches, like emotions are seen as bad, right? Like we say like we shouldn't trust our emotions, we shouldn't, contra to DJ Sammy, we don't listen to our heart. No, nobody say that now. Yeah. So that's super lame joke.
He went there.
So, but like even emotions aren't necessarily bad when you think about it, because Paul, to a certain degree, was intuitive on his missionary journey, like following where the Lord was leading. It was very much an intuitive sense, and so it's just allowing our emotions to be informed by the truth. And so I think we want to be keenly aware that truth can be ascertained through a variety of mediums from an epistemological perspective. But it's also understanding this conception of we've got to be able to talk with one another. When we're not talking with one another, that's really where truth, that's where the battle with truth really starts. When we refuse to listen to one another, when we refuse just to be able to exchange these ideas.
Chelsey, one of the things I was thinking about is when we talk about freedom, that's the whole issue of religious liberty. I know that Kelly sometimes has even had atheists come up afterwards when he's talked about religious liberty and say, you really made a good point. If you lose your liberty, I lose my liberty. Because once you close down any kind of conversation and religious ideas are thrown out the window, pretty soon all ideas get thrown out the window, right?
That's absolutely right. We have there's been a study done, and we have a video, I believe it's on our website, with a professor saying that the first liberty when countries actually become communist or fascist or have a tyrant involved in the first liberty taken away are churches. They said they shut down the churches, they take down the steeples, and that doesn't just have to be Christian churches. We say religious liberty for all, and because religious liberty in the First Amendment is meant to protect all religions. And if any provisions meant to limit one group will limit all religious other groups. And so just being mindful that we've got to keep the marketplace open. We face atheists all the time who are trying to take down crosses off memorials. If you were to take all of the crosses or Stars of David out of all of our veterans memorials or even the veteran cemeteries, they would be empty. And those are symbols of Christian faith. Those are symbols of belief systems. Those are symbols of our heritage. And when those go away, I think that the American people can lose touch with what their heritage is.
I can see why some people would say, why do you care about a cross that's out in the Mojave Desert? Why do you care about this cross in Montana, this cross in Maryland? But you understand that you start taking down the crosses, it never does really stop once it goes that direction, does it?
That's right. I think not only is it a symbol of as I mentioned, our heritage, it's important to know that removal of any sign of religion or semblance of religion from the public sphere, that is our opponent's goal. And so you have to defend our ability to speak about these issues in public, to have our symbols in public. That's really where they start, is to remove all of that. And I think that if we want to protect our country and the freedoms we have, the freedom of speech flows from our belief system, the truth that we know, the ability to speak to that truth, the ability to publicize that truth in the press. All of our other constitutional rights truly flow from our original right to choose our truth.
I couldn't agree more. It's this idea that seems like such a big thing, right? And so yes and amen. If you're being faced from a societal standpoint or a cultural standpoint, you need to reach out to First Liberty. But then again, just to be proactive, what we saw with Mr. Doyle's book. It's just this idea of hospitality. Sometimes it could be really hard to take a stand in public, but it shouldn't be that hard to be able to invite your neighbor and to be able to have a conversation over dinner right now. I think that's one of the things that's very clear in the biblical narrative. Jesus was a big fan of the dinner party. And what would it look like for us just to be individuals that started hosting some of our neighbors over for dinner and just beginning to have those conversations that can be a little less heated because the pita chips in the middle of the table are heated enough for us and they're cooled down by the hummus, which always makes it better.
That's good. Matter of fact, earlier in the week, we did talk with Tom Doyle about how to reach out to your Muslim neighbors. And so, again, you might want to go back and listen to that. First of all, I just want to thank Chelsey for you coming in. I know you're a busy individual, both as a mom and chief of staff. And again, you can go to First Liberty to find some of that. And I look forward to getting you on the program again.
Thanks. I love being here.
And Dr. J. Nicholas Pritvitz. This is it. The man with a PhD. So, and matter of fact, earlier this week, we let him sit in this chair, and I think maybe next Wednesday we'll let you do it again.
Hey,
so,
I like that idea. I don't know what you guys are thinking, but nevertheless, I enjoy it.
So we were going to do it today. We got so busy, we forgot about it, but we'll do it next week. And again, I hope you'll join us next week. We've got a lot of great interviews. And if you would like to know a little bit more about the things we've covered today, it's all on our website, pointofview.net. And it also has a link to the Denison Forum and First Liberty. I want to thank Andrew, Lisa, as well as Shamila for their help behind the scenes. Have a great weekend. See you back here on Monday.
Does point of view make any difference? I think Dr. Eric Walsh would say it does. Dr. Walsh was fired from his job as District Health Director for the state of Georgia, not because of anything he did or failed to do on the job, but because of sermons he preached in his local church. What does that have to do with Point of View? Jeremy Dyes of First Liberty represented Dr. Walsh, and in February, the state of Georgia paid a large settlement for their religious discrimination. And Jeremy Dyes became an attorney specializing in defending religious liberty greatly because of what he learned listening to Point of View radio as a child. That is the kind of difference you make when you support the Truth Team, but we can't make that difference without your help. Become a partner today in this important mission of speaking truth in love. Join the Truth Team at pointofview.net/team. Choose your giving level, stretch a bit, and please do it today. Or call 800-347-5151. pointofview.net/team. Or 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.